Welcome to the Relationship Recovery Podcast, hosted by Jessica Knight, a certified life coach who specializes in narcissistic and emotional abuse. This podcast is intended to help you identify manipulative and abusive behavior, set boundaries with yourself and others, and heal the relationship with yourself so you can learn to love in a healthy way.
Hello, and thank you for being here. On today's podcast, we have Ashlee Levitch. Ashlee is the host of the Narc and Me, a podcast that interviews many thought leaders in the space of narcissistic abuse on what narcissistic abuse is, how to heal, and how to work through it. Ashlee comes on today to share her story as a survivor of narcissistic abuse, and we touch on some of the threads that typically happen in narcissistic abusive relationships. I really think that you will see a lot of yourself in Ashlee's story, and I know that at the very least, you'll feel very seen after listening to her. Hi, Ashlee. Thank you for being here with me today.
You're so welcome. Thank you for having me.
Can you tell us who you are?
Yes. Well,
Yeah.
that question, who am I? Yeah, my name is Ashlee, obviously, and I have a podcast as well, and I share my story on TikTok and Instagram under the handle the Narc and Me, which is a little bit of a double entendre. It's not really me and the narcissist; it's whoever you are and your narcissist. And I talk about narcissistic abuse, how to heal from it, and I have really connected with this community through sharing a lot of my story and what I have learned throughout this, what we all lovingly refer to as the healing journey.
Yeah. And before we even dive in, I just want to say that I will put Ashlee's podcast link in my show notes, and I highly, highly recommend that you check it out. She's interviewed some amazing people that are really insightful. So Ashlee, today I wanted to dive into your story because you are a survivor of narcissistic abuse. And I think that a lot of people don't really understand that, one, this could happen to anybody, but two, how hard and difficult it is when you're going through it to, one, continue on, but also to even see what's happening. And from listening to your podcast, I know that you've thought very retrospectively as to what was happening during these certain moments and at these times. And I thought you'd be a really great person to have on to share your story.
Yeah, you're right. Anybody could experience this.
Yeah.
This is something that is, unfortunately, it's not a demographic. It's not a location. You see this in everything from low income to high income. Like, I think we have this preconceived notion that a victim of abuse would be maybe not as educated or lower income, or we have these stigmas that we put around these titles, and they couldn't be less accurate. Domestic violence and narcissistic abuse is domestic violence, comes in all shapes, all forms in terms of the abuser as well as the abused. And that's something that I really wanted to shed some light on, because there is a level of shame talking about our abuse. And in a very cliche way, if you looked at me from the outside and you said, okay, well, here's this really independent woman who owns a business and has for a decade, who owns her own home, who has, her cars, her dogs, her life, there's no way she's going to be the one. And that's what's really terrifying about this type of abuse is it's insidious. It doesn't matter where you come from. Narcissists are very targeted in their tactics in gaining their supply, and they do, to a degree, sort of profile their supply. We often see people who you wouldn't expect to be a quote unquote victim, their victim, because they like people who are strong. That assumption that, well, you must have been weak to be so easily manipulated is false. And they like people who make them look good, who are strong, who are successful. It's a challenge for them to break down that sense of self. So I'm certainly not I hope it doesn't come across as boastful or bragging, but I wanted to show that there are all sides, and people in my life were shocked. They were like, you've always been so strong and so confident. Like, how could you be in this situation? And that's exactly the point, is any one of us could be in this situation. And
Yeah.
I did want to shed light on that and bring that to the forefront, because I don't think that we as a society look at just the depth and the expansive reach that a narcissist has. But if you look at the average, the studies show it's anywhere from 2 to 20% of our population. Dr. Romani, who's sort of the expert, thinks it's even more than 20%. And if you look at 8 billion people, even if you were looking at the 2%, that is an incredible number of people. And a narcissist doesn't just touch one person in their life.
Mm-hmm.
So you look at the expansiveness of the damage and carnage that they're able to leave behind, and it's pretty devastating. I think this awareness is critical.
Yeah. Yeah. And Ashlee and I were talking right before the episode just about some of the things that people say. And I wanted to touch on that quickly because it goes right off your point of that this could happen to anyone. And I think a lot of people, they have a hard time with some of the words of it around it. Like they have a hard time with abuse. They have a hard time with calling somebody a narcissist, but it really speaks to like the depth of what you have gone through, that you have gone through abuse and you've survived abuse, and that this isn't something that's light. This isn't a light
No,
thing.
it's
It's
not.
heavy.
Yeah, it is heavy. And most narcissists are not diagnosed, right? So
Yeah.
people have a hard time saying, like, I was abused by a narcissist, because they don't really know. In the narcissistic community, it's a little bit like walks like a duck, quacks like a duck. It's a duck because we know the 9 traits that they have to have, the 5 out of 9, to be a narcissist. And people can be narcissistic. It's a spectrum. We all are. Even someone who is healthy and of sound mind and not disordered still has narcissistic traits. That's normal. In my case was a little bit different. I don't recommend couples therapy with a narcissist. You're not going to get anywhere. But at the time when I was sort of scrambling for, I have done everything, what do I do to make this better? I basically said, at one point, that we had to go to couples therapy. And I think he assumed he could manipulate or gaslight the therapist and make me look like the crazy one. But
Mm-hmm.
to my benefit, the therapist had direct experience with a narcissist, and unbeknownst to me, had really sort of dove into studying what narcissistic abuse was. So he diagnosed him as a narcissist amongst a couple of other things. And he was the
Mm-hmm.
one who came and said he's a narcissist. So I have that ability to say it, but I think what we need to focus on as a community is the partner toxic,
Mm-hmm.
right? Because they don't have to be a narcissist to be toxic and to be manipulative or to gaslight. And once you know that's happening, that's all you need to leave. And you're right. We as survivors get this like, well, why didn't you just leave? Because other people don't understand the gravity of trauma bond and what it
Mm-hmm.
is. And it is one of those cliche phrases, but they don't really know what it's like or the way that you feel or that deep sense of pull it has on you unless they've gone through it. And that's the cliche phrase of like, unless they've experienced it, they don't understand. But there is truth in that. And the
Yeah.
phrase of like, "Why don't you just get over it?" Well, you can't. You're in a trauma bond, which is statistically harder to break than a heroin addiction. You need help to get through this. And those phrases they're detrimental. They're, in my opinion, also a little bit abusive. They're not supportive. And you have to find your tribe who does get it so that you have that support system to help you get through these things that are not normal. They're
Yeah.
just not. This is not a normal breakup.
Yeah. So I find myself like just wanting to like jump right into all these different parts, but I want to take a step back and talk a little bit about who you were before the narcissist. Like, cause you made a point to say, which is very valid, that this could happen to anybody.
Yeah.
And you mentioned owning your business, and I do know a little of your story. So can you tell us a little bit about like who you were and if it ties together with how you met the narcissist? I think that would be helpful for people just to see that really it can happen to anybody.
Yeah. I was just a happy girl living in Los Angeles. I was living
Yeah.
my life with my friends, and I wasn't necessarily looking for a relationship. And I was running my company. I had just set up a new office and had, a bunch of great new employees. And we were really just getting this company off the ground and having a great time doing it. I felt like I was most definitely at the strongest, happiest point of my life. And I was just doing my thing. You know what I mean? I wasn't feeling like anything was missing. I certainly would have loved at that point. My thought process was, if I meet someone that would be great, I would love it. But I'm also not putting my focus on that. I'd been single for a while. And
Hmm.
I really felt like at that point that my career was the most important thing. And I was living in LA. I had a house there. I had a house in LA for 20 something years. And I was just that existing in my most perfect way, right? Like I had my dogs, I had my house, I had my friends, I was confident, and I was in a place that I felt really good and safe and happy to be in. And I actually did meet him through work. He
Mm.
came on as he was working at the time as a web developer, and I was redoing my website. And the team that I was working with, they were really struggling to get the features right and get things done on time and meet deliverables. And they started outsourcing to someone. And one day they finally just kind of fessed up and said, we can't do the work and we feel really bad. We're basically taking a profit off of outsourcing to someone else. And so
Yeah.
we're going to turn you over to him. And if it works out with him, great. Or if you want somebody else, that's fine. But I had known the person who owned that company for some time. And I honestly think he felt like he had a guilty conscience at that point. And I met this web developer, and it didn't make sense for me to search out someone new because he actually was getting the work done. And we worked together platonically for many months, but it was very clear that we had something. We would be on the phone in the middle of the night. We hadn't talked about work for hours. And that just kept escalating until the project was done. And there was ongoing work, obviously, but the new launch had happened. And we just slid straight into a relationship. And that's my narcissist. And that was how we met. And then my life sort of unraveled from there for 5 years with him.
And so when you reflect back now and you think about those early moments of meeting him at work, did you pick up on some of the narcissistic qualities in him? Like, I know then probably not, but now looking back, do you see that in him? Did he have that need for admiration? Did he have that grandiose self-importance? Did he have any of that that you could pick up on? I think those come out a lot in the workplace.
I didn't pick up on that. The only thing was he really was over the top confident, but he
Yeah.
also was really good and he delivered. So I don't even in hindsight see that sort of narcissistic side of him in the workplace. Not from my experience. It was once we were in a relationship that all of those things started surfacing.
Okay.
So I don't even look back and say like, wow, I missed the red flags when we were working together because he was very single focused on work and really did a great job. I have to give him that. Like he's very talented at what he does. He doesn't do that anymore. He's changed careers multiple times since then, but he definitely was driven and successful and did his thing and did it well. And I didn't see that side of him relating to work. But like I said, once we were in a relationship, now I look back and say, oh man,
Yeah.
you know what I mean? I thought this was X and instead it was H. Like it's
Yeah.
so different now in hindsight from what I thought was happening. And I think that can be really hard for the survivor is we get stuck unraveling this mess in our head because just by nature as human beings, we need to have a level of understanding because there will never be any closure. So we start to dissect every moment and we can get stuck in that loop. And the hard part is once we start seeing things when we're far enough out, then we sort of, it's like watching a movie. I was saying this to a friend the other night. When you watch a movie for a second time and you're like, oh, wow, did I even see this movie? Like, where was that? I totally missed it. That's what reliving those moments can be like for us. It's that great book Out of the Fog. We're able to
Hmm.
sort of replay it in a totally different way in our mind and see what was really happening once we know the signs, once we know the tactics. And that's what was really difficult for me and still continues to be. He left a year and a half ago and I've been 1 year no contact, or maybe a little more than a year and a half, because we talked for 9 months after he left, which was just brutal. And even still, some things will trigger a memory. And what I thought was happening versus now what I know to be happening can be really jarring.
Yeah. Do you feel like you were love bombed by him at the beginning of the relationship?
I don't know if I was love bombed straight away because I don't think that I was. Because remember, our situation was very different, right?
Yeah, because you knew
He
each
was my
other. Yeah,
employee.
right.
We knew each other, but he was also my employee. So I don't think I was love bombed right away. And looking back, it's really interesting because someone in this community who I've become really close with sort of dissected things for me in a way I'd never looked at them before in the early stages of our relationship. And it makes a lot of sense the way that he said, this is what I think happened. The love bombing for me actually happened. We had been dating and he really, to me, I was totally in love with him. Like once we started dating, I quickly fell in love with him. I do think there were some elements of love bombing, but
Yeah.
I think more importantly, he actually went straight to trauma bond. I think he trauma
Okay.
bonded me at the very beginning. And then not that far in, we had like a little bit of a breakup and then he came back. He sort of panicked and freaked out and broke my heart. And then he came back and that's when the love bombing started. I actually think it was trauma bond. And then when we sort of had this like very small, short, brief discard, then he came back and fully love bombed me. And then the cycle continued after that over and over and over. But that was the biggest first love bombing cycle that we had.
Yeah. So I've done a few episodes on trauma bond. So I'm going to just say that my listeners understand what a trauma bond is. But so when you say that you feel like pretty early on you were trauma bonded, can you explain what that looks like?
Yeah, absolutely. So a narcissist will bring to the table some sort of victim story. And most of the people who end up in a relationship with a narcissist are either an empath or codependent or both. We have this ability to see beyond their trauma and see their value. And there is a part of us who knows that we can love them in a way or believes that we can love them in a way that they will then feel whole and that will give them those missing pieces. And the trauma bond is that it's when they bring a victim story to the table and you are falling in love with this person and you feel like you can conquer their trauma to a degree. And then it's coupled with whether it be breadcrumbs or full on love bombing and they've brought this facade to the table, right? This perfect person that seems to be your perfect match. And that doesn't always have to be over the top. Like that can just be weird commonalities. I had this as my first car. Oh my gosh, I had that as my first car. They paint this picture of they are your perfect match. And all of that creates this perfect storm that then elevates certain levels of chemicals in your body and you become chemically addicted to them. That trauma bond creates that chemical addiction very early on, which is why the cycle of abuse becomes so dangerous because your brain and your body learn that even though you're going to go through devaluing and all of these awful abusive steps, that's okay because the upside, the love bombing or the positive side or the breadcrumbs are going to come back around. It's the same thing as a drug addict. Those lows come, right, when they come off the high, but they're going to do it again. They know that high is coming again. So that trauma bond is the beginning of the really dangerous cycle. And that cycle isn't actually inflicted, I would say, solely by the narcissist. That cycle is actually inflicted by our biological chemistry as a coping mechanism to the abuse. And that's where it's just a toxic soup, right?
Yeah.
That's where we get stuck because their actions have trained our bodies into thinking, okay, well, I can sustain this abuse because a good cycle is coming back. So those dopamine levels are going to come around again. So we'll send you all of these other chemicals to keep you hooked until we can get back to that good one feeling good again. And we know it's coming. And that's why we stick around for more abuse. So that becomes that sort of really sick cycle of the trauma bond. And that's why it's so hard to break afterwards because we're essentially like a drug addict waiting for that next hit. And we're in withdrawal, literally physically in withdrawal from the chemical that's the good one that we need to sustain this life. And that's when all of the other really damaging things start to happen to us, whether that be, you know, the self-questioning. It can go as deep as depression. It can go into suicidal thoughts and behaviors. And that's why we can't do this alone, because
Mhm.
breaking the trauma bond is breaking a chemical addiction that you literally need help getting through.
Yeah. So when you realized that you were trauma bonded, probably at that point you realized you were stuck. You didn't realize you were trauma bonded. You realized something was happening that didn't feel normal, that didn't look normal. And I'm going to guess that you felt stuck. Do you remember about how many months into the relationship that was that you started to notice that?
Yeah, so I think that somewhere deep down inside, I knew that I was trauma bonded, but I had no idea what trauma bond was,
Right.
right? Because I didn't even know what narcissism was. When our couples therapist called me and said, "You're being abused by a narcissist and I need you to run," I had to Google it
Yeah.
years, and that was almost 4.5 years into our relationship. But I knew early on, because when things would happen and he would screw up, or I would find him on Tinder, or he would discard me and then come back. I think I knew what trauma bond was to a degree, but what I would say for myself is he's my kryptonite.
Mm-hmm.
I had no idea why I couldn't say no to him. Boy, I loved him so deeply that no matter what he did, when he would come back and either half-ass apologize or love bomb me or do whatever, I would always say okay. And at a certain point in the relationship, maybe a little, I mean, for the first year, we moved to Austin from Los Angeles about a year in. And not that long after, he really messed up. And
Yeah,
then
I want to
when he,
pause just quickly because I know that there's a part of your story, just because I've listened to it on your podcast that, and just correct me if I'm wrong about, I mean, obviously it's your story, so please do correct me. But I think there was a point in it, and this kind of struck me where like you didn't really want to leave LA, but you left LA.
yeah, no, I didn't want to leave.
Yeah.
So I had asked him to move in and he had said no.
Okay.
And then one morning we woke up. It was the end of June in 2017. We met in 2016. And he said, "Babe, I'm moving in." And I was like, "What? You're moving in?" Like,
Yeah.
oh,
Best day ever. Yeah.
yeah, like best day ever. The man I'm completely in love with wants to move in and we're going to make this life together. And he said, "But I'm also moving to Texas." And then I started to cry.
Yeah.
And I was like, "Wait, wait." And it was like the world started spinning really fast and I couldn't get my footing. And I was like, "Which is it? Are you moving in or are you moving back to Texas?" And he was like, "Both." I mean, I'm going to come back to LA and see you and the dogs and like be with us and like do our thing. And I'll stay here. But then I'm moving back to Texas because I have this business and I need to pay some attention to it. And I was like, "Well, so you're not moving in. That's just you crashing here when you stay here." And he's like, "No, babe, like you can whatever, like hang out with me and like come visit me there. But like, you know, I'll live with you when I'm here."
He's
And I was
basically
super,
telling you that you're signing up for a long distance relationship
yeah,
without
which
talking
I
to
was
you
like,
about it.
with no consulting me. And I was like,
Yeah.
"When? Like, when do you want to go?" And he was like, next weekend," which was 4th of July weekend. And I was like, "Next weekend?" And he was like, "Yeah." He's like, "Why don't you call your mom and see if she'll dog sit for us? And you can come with me. We'll drive down there." So basically, in hindsight, now I know he just wanted a buddy to come with him and pack up all his stuff for him, which I did,
Yeah.
and move him down here. And I had never met his family. And he's like, "You'll meet my family. It'll be great. And we'll go and I'll show you Austin. It'll be a great time." And I'm sobbing
Yeah.
hysterically. And then he was like, "Why are you crying?" And I was like, "Because," and I said exactly what you said, like long distance doesn't work in most cases. Like you're essentially saying you're ending our relationship because you might meet someone there. Like who knows what's going to happen. And then he quickly jumped to, "Babe, you're moving too. You and the dogs. I want all of us to move together. We're a family." So I now know in hindsight, he had not thought that through. He
Hmm.
just realized in that moment he was going to have to start over with someone else at some point in Texas. He didn't want to lose supply, and he certainly didn't want to do all of this alone. When I did so many things for him, I did so much of everything for him. It was going to be way better to take the person with him who did everything for him. And he quickly jumped to, "We're moving." And it was really overwhelming for me. I was like, I've never even been to Texas and I didn't want to leave LA. All my friends were there. I'd owned my house for, like I said, over 20 years. I had an office, I had a business, and I was just really overwhelmed, like you can imagine anybody would be. So I called my mom. She said she could dog sit and she would take care of the dogs on 4th of July weekend. I spent that week packing up his stuff. In the back of my mind, so many red flags were going off. I was packing up stuff that I was like, I've never even seen this before. Like, what is
Yeah.
this? Do I throw this away? Do I keep this? Like, who is this man? I've been with him for a year, but do I even really know him? Like, all of these things were running through my mind. But then the other side of me, the excitement and being in love with him, would just override it all.
Yeah.
And we did it. We came here. We saw Austin. Austin was one big love bomb, showed me the best of Austin, introduced me to some of his friends. It was really wildly overwhelming. I cried hysterically the day I had to leave
Mm-hmm.
and go back to LA because I was so trauma bonded. I just wanted to be with him. I felt safe when I was with him, which is such an ironic statement. Whenever I was hurt, and that's the thing about abuse, the abuser is the one that soothes you.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so I felt this pull to get back to him. I would continually visit. He had plans to come back to LA in the in between of like, I would come here 1 week, he would come back. He continually canceled all his trips with excuses and then would want me to come back here. And he only came back the week that I was actually moving, which was the beginning of August. And I rushed into some people renting my house that I didn't feel good about, and it didn't turn out well. But I wanted to get down here to be with him. So I did it, and I gave up my whole life and moved here. And ironically, whenever we were in an argument and I would point out that I gave up a lot to be here with him, he would say, "What did you give up? You didn't give up anything. You
Yeah.
moved to a better place to have a better life. I'm the one who gave something up. I have to sleep with you and the dogs. That's like not the most restful thing,"
Yeah.
which is so insulting.
So devaluing. So
Yeah,
devaluing. Yeah.
but I did it. And it's been a struggle. I'm not going to make light of it. It has
Yeah.
been a struggle because now I live in Texas. Eventually, at his urging, I sold my house in LA. I built a house here, and it's a struggle. It feels like it's his place. Even after 5 years, I feel like I'm living in his place.
Yeah.
And, creating friendships and relationships. It's tough when you're an adult. And most of your listeners probably are, they get that too. When you're an
Yes.
adult, if you're not married, you don't have kids, like establishing a community for yourself is a challenge. So I will not make light of that for any of your listeners who also uprooted themselves and moved somewhere for their narcissist. Like, it is an uphill battle to feel at home anywhere after that.
Yeah. So I cut you off to kind of go back to the beginning, but I want to go back to that spot. And then, of course, we'll get to like where you are now and what the healing felt like. But you said like he really messed up in the middle. And can you tell us about that? Like that sounds like that might have been like an incident that you were able to be like, okay, something else is going on here. It's not just a toxic relationship. Like it's toxic, but it's more than that.
Yeah, unfortunately, it was more than once that this
Yeah.
happened. I caught him on Tinder, and he had given me his phone to text someone. And he's so brazen that he didn't even delete the text to reactivate his account. And when
Mm,
I went to text someone on his phone and he handed me his phone, it was the first text in the history was Tinder reactivating the account. And of course, I felt sick. It was like my whole body ran cold because everything again started running through my head. I gave up my whole life. I don't have the accessibility to move home to my house. Now I live in Texas where I only know his friends and I live with him. I gave up my house. I gave up my friends. I gave up my office in LA. Like, what the fuck am I going to do now? It was all really overwhelming. When you can't get your brain to shut off and like
yeah.
every thought floods at you at once and you're
Yeah.
like, oh my God, oh my God, oh my God. I didn't know what to do. And we were sitting in a car waiting for our friend to get in the car for us to go in the boat. And we had an argument the night before, but like a typical narcissist, he wakes up in the morning and all is good. Let's go on the boat. Let's go do something fun. And just because I had an emotional hangover about the fight, I had to let it go. Because
Yeah.
if I were in a bad mood, then it was just going to make it all worse. So I said, sure, okay, we'll go on the boat. I'll get the dogs to camp. I'll pack snacks. Like I'll do all the stuff that I have to do. Let's get in the car and let's go pick up our friend Dave. And we did. And I was sitting in the car and we were waiting for Dave to come out. And I saw that text message and I handed him the phone and said, you didn't even have the decency to delete it. And he was like, what? What are you talking about?
Yeah.
And I said, the first text is a Tinder reactivation of your account. And he was like, babe, we had a fight. I thought we were done. I was just seeing what was out there.
Oh,
And I was like, oh my God. So that was that moment.
Yeah. Oh my God. I was just seeing what was out there. It's like, I just like, what don't you get? Yeah. When you were talking about that moment, it was so interesting. Like what was happening in my body is like, I feel like I have had so many of those moments where a lot of times I have to swallow it because of the
Oh
situation that
yeah.
we were in. And I could imagine like being in the car and getting the phone and seeing it. And like my body would typically freeze in those moments. Like it was almost
Me
like,
too.
yeah, I would feel every single thing like lock up with my ex-husband. It was one of those, like every time I looked, I found something. Like there was one time I went on his Facebook and he was like to like literally look up someone, like he was logged into my computer, and I was like, oh, this is his Facebook. There's a message. And then, well, who is he messaging?
Yeah.
Which I shouldn't necessarily be doing, but obviously something's bringing me to it. And there was always something. Well, like,
Always.
yeah, messaging people from his past, inappropriate messages with people from work, at like porn. If it wasn't any of those things, like paying for porn, it was like every time I looked, I found something. And then I got to the point where I was just so afraid to continue looking because I knew I was going to keep finding things, especially after I became a mom. But that moment, that like freeze, it's like we're taught in these relationships that we have to fawn in order to survive. We have to, like you said, like, you got out of bed, you put your happy face on, you got all the things together because you're the only person who's going to do it.
And if I didn't, I knew there would be another punishment coming.
Exactly. Or you would have ruined the day. That's what it would have been like. You made this a bad day. You can't let anything go. When it's like, no, I'm healing. Like I'm emotionally hungover. I'm tired. I'm exhausted. And so I know that this is probably like 100,000 things happen between now and when you finally leave. But I want to touch on like a bit of the ending and what got you there. So you told us that you had a couples therapist that called this out and that opened up your eyes to a lot of things that were happening. I'm sure that helped you begin to go down at least this path, since it did lead you to Google what a narcissist is.
No, I took him back.
Okay.
He came back and love bombed me after.
Okay.
So he had left me at that point to figure out what he wanted. And it was only a couple of weeks that he was gone. And the therapist had called and my whole world was spinning because holy crap, what is happening? And what is all of this? And it did make all the sense in the world when I started reading about it. And then he came back and love bombed me again and said he wanted to get pregnant. He wanted to marry me. And we'd been talking about getting married for years. He had asked my dad 3 years prior. He'd planned a million proposals and then would say, oh, you blew it up. I was going to do it, but you screwed it up. And now I'm not going to do it. And would tell me what the proposal was. And so he came back saying he was ready. And he pulled the baby card, which he knew how desperately I wanted a baby. And I was in my mid 40s and I knew I didn't have much time left. And I took him back.
Mm-hmm.
And then it was only 4 more months before he discarded me. And it was an argument over the baby. Like we were working with a fertility clinic and he was being very unresponsive to me in the fertility clinic about any answers anybody had that he was asked to give. And I obviously couldn't get pregnant on my own at that point and needed help. And when I questioned him on it, he basically just said, I'm out. And so he left. And we talked for 9 months and I was gaslit. I was ghosted. I was so trauma bonded. I didn't have a therapist at that time. I didn't know what to do. And we kept going back and forth until I was literally a shell of myself, could not handle life. I was suicidal. And I went no contact over the dumbest thing. He sent me a link to a TikTok video with this little plastic cup you wash your dog's paws with. And I unloaded, which I don't recommend doing. And it doesn't actually work very well with most narcissists, but I unloaded over email. I'd already changed my phone number so he couldn't text me or call me. And I just unloaded over email, calling out the abuse, calling him an abuser, talking to him about, he knew about the diagnosis. I had told him, telling him about how I felt and basically threatening him, saying that I would get a no contact order. Anything I could say, I said in the email. I just raged at him. And he came back a couple of times, like emailing me again. And that was it for me. And I hadn't spoken to him since. And it's been 13 months.
How did it feel when he came back after you hit no contact and like he would try and get in? I know for me, and I don't know what it was like for you, but when I finally got to that point of no contact, and mine was also over something silly, I was like, no, I am done. And then when he did reach out the first time, I felt like my body went into flight and freeze all at once.
Yeah.
Like all at once. I kept the boundary, but it was still very traumatic. It was a very traumatic day.
He didn't reach out after that night. He kind of emailed a couple times that night that I
Yeah.
unloaded on him. And then
Okay.
that was it. And, I had a different phone number, so he couldn't text or call me. And he immediately blocked me on all social, which was a game because then he could still see me, but I couldn't see him. So I
Yeah.
had to eventually make my profiles private. And I didn't hear from him again. I saw him once at an event at a ski show at basically the lake we both go to and continue to both go to. And he tried to get my attention, but there were a lot of people around me who know what happened and support me, and nobody was going to let him get near me. And he did make attempts. He didn't speak to me, but I would turn around. He'd be standing right behind me, smiling at me. He would do things like that to fuck with
Yeah.
me.
Yeah.
And that was last summer. It was the last time I've been in the same space with him. I felt like I could throw up. I felt I was sweating. It was like my whole body went into fight or flight mode, and this like sense of dysregulation, but we have not had any communication. And I think honestly it's because he's busy. Unfortunately we hear things that happen with their lives, even when you don't want to. They have flying monkeys, or you just happen to hear things. And he met someone or like beginning of summer, end of last spring. And within 2 months they lived together. And within like 2.5 months, they were already pregnant. So
Wow.
he's busy with the supply. So I don't hear from him, which is a blessing because he's already on to someone else. And for anyone else, 2-3 months into a relationship to have a planned pregnancy is a big red flag.
Oh yeah. Oh yeah. We don't know who they are, within.
No, you don't know who somebody is in 6 months. You
No.
barely know at a year. Like you will learn about this person for the rest of your life in a healthy relationship. But no, so I don't hear from him, which is really great. Like he's on to his new person,
Yeah.
whatever that means.
The pregnancy part just hit me really hard when you said that. And I just kind of want to just acknowledge that I'm sure that hurts.
Oh, I was told by accident. Someone slipped
Oh, it's
and
the
said
worst,
something.
isn't it? Yeah.
Someone said a comment about, and in the comment was doing this because of the baby.
Oh,
And I
yeah.
was like, what baby? And I was devastated. I was nothing short of devastated.
Yeah.
That was the hardest thing in the world to hear because I really struggled with the infertility and what that meant for me as a woman to not be able to have a baby and then to have to consider all these other options. And it was a really emotional time for me. I felt like a failure as a woman, and it was just tough, and it brought a lot of that back. And the fact that he knew I wanted, we talked about having a baby 4 years before the end of our relationship. So he essentially ran out the clock. And throughout the relationship, I would say, if you don't want this with me, please let me go so I can find someone while I still have time. And he ran down the clock and then found someone else and immediately got them pregnant. And that was devastating, to say the
Yeah.
least.
Yeah. Well, I haven't talked much on any podcast about the new supply and anything like that, mostly because I didn't experience it in that way. The supply wasn't a new person. It was other things in the
Right.
person's life.
It can be work. And that
Yeah.
happened for us too. When he started a new company, it was like I didn't exist anymore because that was the new supply for a while.
Yeah. I mean, it's so painful, right?
Yeah.
I know we're coming up on time. And one of the other things that you and I talked about right before we got started was, I said to you that there were so many times that I wish that instead of having to get over and understand and like work through the trauma of being abused, I wished often that I just had a broken arm or a broken leg so that the outside world would understand like, okay, see, look, it's broken. Can't you see? It's
Yeah.
broken right now. But a lot of people say really painful things like, just get over it. Aren't you strong? Whatever, what happened to you? You were such a strong person. Like, don't you know better? And it makes my blood boil because unless you've gone through it, you don't know it. And, you and I are both on TikTok. I'm sure I get tons of comments about like, you're just a passive aggressive victim. And I'm like, yep.
I don't get a lot of that, which is really nice.
Yeah.
So I get some trolls, I do get some trolls, but yeah, I mean, it is unbelievably difficult. And I say this all the time. You can't do it alone. You need a good trauma therapist to help you through it. You need a narcissistic abuse informed therapist to help. And this community is essential. There's group coaching. There are a lot of resources out there when you're looking for them. But domestic violence is not something that people get if it hasn't happened to them, because this one is so specific. Breaking down your sense of self is the most damaging thing someone can do to someone else. Because if you have your sense of self, but you've been abused in a different way, you can work through the trauma, you can get past it. But we have a whole different set of challenges in having to rediscover who we are, learning how to set boundaries, learning how we're going to function, dealing with triggers and trust issues. This is a very complex trauma, and it's difficult to get through, and it takes years. I'm not going to tell anyone otherwise. You have to find your community and the people that get it and the people that can support you. And I don't mean this constant trauma dump between a couple of people back and forth because it keeps you stuck in it. But finding people who can support you when you're having a hard day is essential.
Yeah. And that really know what that feels like, really knows what that moment feels like.
Absolutely.
Some of my clients will come to me. I had one today who's like, I just wonder where the good parts went. We spend time thinking about what the realistic viewpoint of that is, though.
And what your new future looks like.
Exactly. Because there is a new future. And I like to think about the new future as we are able to, we can recreate ourselves. We can take the parts of ourselves that we liked and bring them back if they've been hiding for a while, but we also can just start fresh in these other places. And we can clear out toxicity of our life in other ways, because once you clear it out in this way, you're going to see it in every other area of your life too. You can't have a bunch of toxic friends, but also are healing from these abusive patterns.
Absolutely.
Thank you so much for joining me.
You're welcome.
Can you tell us where we can find you?
Yeah, you can find me on TikTok at the Narc and Me, same on Instagram. And you can search that handle, the Narc and Me, or that title anywhere you get your podcasts. And you can find my podcast as well.
And I will put the link in the show notes so everybody can find it. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Really appreciate it.